Chairperson of the African Ombudsman Research Centre, President of the African Ombudsman and Mediators Association, and Public Protector of South Africa, Advocate Busisiwe Mkhwebane, Dean and Head of the UKZN School of Law, and member of the AORC Board, Professor Managay Reddy, and our esteemed panel. It is my pleasure to extend a warm welcome to Senior Fellow 2020 of the Advanced Leadership Initiative at Harvard University, former Director of AORC and former Ombudsman of Bermuda, Advocate Arlene Brock. It is great to welcome you back to your home. I'm pleased that you're still able to support the work of AORC. Greetings to the former Ombudsman of Malawi, Honorable Martha Chizuma, and congratulations on your new position as Director General of the Anti-Corruption Bureau of Malawi. Greetings to the Deputy Ombudsman of Ontario, Ms. Barbara Finlay, Excellencies and Honorable Ombudsmen who are able to join us, distinguished participants, guests. Greetings, senior colleagues. As the Acting Deputy Vice Chancellor and Head of the College of Law and Management Studies, it is my absolute pleasure on behalf of the Vice Chancellor and Council of the University of KwaZulu-Natal to welcome you to the 5th webinar session for 2021 of the AORC themed Systemic Investigations. We are meeting at a critical time when Africa is dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic and its effect on our economies. Looking at the rollout of vaccines, many African states have yet to secure any doses, while others have secured supplies for no more than 10% of their populations. It is unclear when and if much needed vaccines will reach indigent communities. On the other hand, unscrupulous business organizations have taken advantage of the situation and benefited from corrupt government contracts. This is a systemic challenge with dire consequences for local communities. Further, if we look at the 2021 African election calendar of the Electoral Institute for Sustainable Democracy in Africa, this is a challenging year for democracy in Africa, as many of our states are undergoing the election process. During the electioneering, politicians make promises to communities in exchange for votes. In the past, we have seen promises being broken, leaving vulnerable communities dealing with systemic socioeconomic challenges. While great strides have been made and much achieved in the realm of technology, states are now further exposed to cybercrimes, in particular, our continental economic hubs such as South Africa, Nigeria, and Kenya. These are just a few of many systemic challenges facing our continent in 2021. Therefore, the Ombudsman Institution has a mammoth task to ensure that governments are held accountable for their activities and practices. In keeping with the mandate of AORC to promote capacity development, knowledge generation, and professionalism within African Ombudsman institutions, today's webinar focuses the spotlight on systemic investigations. I look forward to hearing from our esteemed panel as they unpack various facets of systemic investigations, which will empower the offices of Ombudsman in the furtherance of good governance, the rule of law, and human rights in Africa. I once again welcome you to the 5th webinar of the AORC in 2021. It is now my pleasure to hand over to Advocate Mkhwebane, who will now formally welcome you as the chairperson of AORC. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor MacArthur, for the warm welcome. Also, I'll start by making sure that I give you an opening remark before I introduce our panelists. So I'll start by saying to everyone, thank you, Professor MacArthur, Deputy Vice Chancellor and Acting Head of College of Law and Management Studies at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, Honorable Martha Chizuma, former Ombudsman of Malawi, Ms. Barbara Finlay, Deputy Ombudsman of Ontario, Advocate Aline Brock, former Director of AORC and former Ombudsman of Bermuda. Ladies and gentlemen, and all other ombudsmen who are here, thank you so much for joining. One of the challenges that organizations worldwide have to confront over the last 2 years is remaining relevant and continuing to function even in the face of this COVID-19 pandemic. Ombudsman and mediators institutions across the globe have not been spared. The pandemic has forced us to be innovative and reimagine our diverse roles in a setting where we are not to be in physical contact. Since last year, the African Ombudsman Research Centre has been holding successful webinars and virtual training sessions in an effort to ensure that its capacity building programs does not merely become redundant, but then also making sure that we keep track of what is happening. And thanks so much for their excellent and sterling work. Today is yet another opportunity for us as the Ombudsman and Mediators community in Africa through AORC to empower and equip ourselves with the kind of knowledge that is sure to ensure our work of helping the continent realize its ambitious aspirations as spelled out in Agenda 2063, the Africa we want. As you may recall, Agenda 2063 is Africa's master plan to transform the continent into a global powerhouse. It is the continent's strategic framework for inclusive and sustainable development. The plan is underpinned by 7 aspirations, but those which are relevant to us as ombudsman and mediators community aspirations 3 and 4, which are about good governance, democracy, respect for human rights, justice, and the rule of law, as well as peace and security. This webinar is not a solo effort on the part of AORC. It is in partnership with IOI, which is International Ombudsman Institute, a 43-year-old global institution which advocates for the cooperation of more than 200 independent ombudsman and mediators institutions in well over 100 countries worldwide. As part of good governance, the IOI focuses in its efforts on capacity building, supporting its members in, among other things, training and research. This resonates with what the African Ombudsman and Mediators Association, where I'm the president, and what we do, and also we empower the continent through AORC. This is why in April 2013, AOMA and IOI signed an MOU in terms of which the 2 institutions agreed to foster close cooperation in the area of benchmarking through avenues such as participation in conferences and meetings, study visits, and exchange information. Ms. Finlay, you will be glad to note that one of the first training sessions which was made possible by this MOU came in November 2013 when the former of Ontario, Mr. Marin, took his acclaimed Sharpening Your Teeth training program to Lusaka. But the Pirate Protector South Africa team of investigations had already become the first in Africa to sharpen their teeth in 2011, joining the ranks of the likes of the Canadian federal and provincial agencies, US and federal departments, Europe and the Caribbean, Australia, South America, and Asia, amongst others. So today we join this session from the comfort of our homes and offices to enrich our minds on the critical subject of systemic investigations. And we will hear from experts in the field or in this field. And we will hear from Ms. Finlay, Advocate Brock, and Honorable Chizuma. Systemic investigations are probably the Ombudsman and Mediators' most impactful work. It is part of our work where instead of concentrating on individual and isolated cases, we turn our efforts into bigger problem, which seems to care and affects more people in the communities. And such are mostly own initiative investigations where we see challenges in various communities. So above all else, through systemic investigations, ombudsmen and mediators can inspire good governance practices in government, the identification of problem areas, recommendation of remedies, and monitoring implementation thereof. And this can have a positive change in administration. So I look forward to drinking from the cups of esteemed experts and hope that you just as excited about this as I am. Now turning to the various esteemed experts which we have, we've got Advocate Aline Brock, who is a 2020-2021 Senior Fellow of the Advanced Leadership Initiative at Harvard University. She is developing an animated video series for middle school age that presents counter narratives to be the negative stereotypes of Black peoples that have persisted over the past 4 centuries. Previously, professional work includes launching the Ombudsman Institution in Bermuda as the island's first national ombudsman, a constitutional official who investigates complaints about the delivery of public services, director of the African Ombudsman Research Centre in South Africa, which is also researching and capacitating 44 national ombudsmen throughout the continent, mediators with also capacitated mediators with conflict management, including solvency, a lawyer, and a labor lecturer. She has served as the chair of the Police Complaints Authority and Permanent Administration Tribunal in Bermuda. She holds honorary life membership in the International Ombudsman Institute, which she was a former board member and a chair of the training committee and VP of the Caribbean, Latin America region, and the Caribbean former Ombudsman Association. So welcome, Advocate Brock, and we are ready to hear your contribution. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for your warm welcome. It is wonderful to be back home at AORC virtually. And it is also wonderful to see so many colleagues from all over the world and the continent of Africa, old and new, who I'm now meeting virtually. I trust you are all well and safe, and your families and your colleagues, and you are in my prayers as you all and your countries are trying to deal with the current pandemic. I will run in right away and start my questions where, what is a systemic investigation? What criteria warrant a systemic investigation? And I will conclude with a couple of remarks on the value of a systemic investigation. So systemic investigations are usually conducted when concerns or complaints point to a pattern that indicate that practices or policies, procedures within a department or ministry negatively affect more than a single individual complainant. And so an ombudsman will look at the systems, structures, policies, procedures, practices. These are often uncovered in several ways. You can, an ombudsman may determine that there's a systemic issue during a preliminary investigation of an individual complaint. And quite often, individual complainants themselves will allege that the situation doesn't apply just to them, but in fact is systemic within that department. And quite often also, there's media hype. When issues get to the media and the media starts to complain about practices within a particular department, the ombudsman will keep an ear for that and listen and see whether or not that is something that they should be involved in. In fact, prior to the financial crisis of the early 2000s, the Quebec ombudsman actually had a staff member who part-time would peruse the media, listen to the talk shows, just to see if there was something of interest to the ombudsman. But I think the financial crisis made them restrict that kind of activity. I want to just at the outset distinguish systemic investigations from systemic recommendations. Ombudsman may make a recommendation regarding the system, the policies, procedures, practices, and so on without conducting an actual systemic investigation. Often those are cases where in reviewing a particular complaint, it becomes obvious that there was a system issue. In addition to solving that individual complaint, the ombudsman may recommend that the department look at the systemic issues without having to actually conduct a whole investigation. There are other instances where a systemic issue appears, but it would not be a good use of the ombudsman's resources to actually conduct the investigation themselves. And so the ombudsman may recommend that the department or the ministry go forward with a systemic review investigation. I did that in Bermuda when we had a complaint about the accommodations for one particular student who was deaf. And as I investigated that issue and tried to mediate what ought to happen with that particular student, it became obvious to me that there were issues where the government really wasn't paying attention to the needs of all special needs students. And so I recommended they conduct such an investigation. They did so, they credited the ombudsman, and they actually revised the entire Department of Education's policies as a consequence. And I did not have to do an investigation for that. Most of my examples will come from the experience in Bermuda, and I just want to note that the Bermuda Ombudsman Act actually specifically states that pursuant to an investigation, any investigation, the ombudsman may make recommendations generally about ways of improving administrative practices and procedures. And then in addition to that, the Ombudsman Act says that on his own motion, notwithstanding that no complaint has been made, where the ombudsman is satisfied that there are reasonable grounds to carry out an investigation in the public interest, then they would do so. And that is where the authority for own motion, or sometimes called own initiative investigations, come for the ombudsman for Bermuda. My understanding is that as many as 87% of ombudsmen globally actually have the power to launch investigations on their own motion or initiative. There are some cases, I believe still in the UK, where a relevant complaint must first be lodged before an ombudsman exercises that discretion to undertake a systemic investigation. Now, of course, one doesn't investigate systemically willy-nilly. You have to be clear that there are criteria, and the ombudsman ought to be persuaded that conducting a systemic investigation would lead to continued or high-value service improvements in the department or ministry they're looking at. And one of the reasons you exercise that discretion is practical, and that is that these investigations take time, they take staff, and you have to make sure that it's a good use of your resources as an ombudsman to undertake such an investigation, especially when you are in small or underfunded offices. I think we'll hear from Barb Finley that, of course, notably, the Ombudsman Ontario has, in fact, a special department, the Special Ombudsman Response Team, or SORT, which on systemic investigations, and they will often draw in regular staff as needed for those investigations. But we'll hear more about that, I hope, from Barb Finley. I must mention that a systemic investigation doesn't always have to entail large staff and time commitments. The most clever systemic investigation I've ever heard of came in 1999 for the Ombudsman of Barbados. At that time, the ombudsman was receiving repeated complaints that access to public beaches had been restricted by beachfront landowners who would put barriers up to stop people from crossing onto the public paths to get to the public beaches. And instead of a long-winded documentary and so forth investigation, the Ombudsman for Barbados brought the media along, lots of media and lots of public officials, and went on a walk. It was called the South and West Coast Walk, where most of the good beaches were located. And he tried to access the beaches with the media in tow. That was more than enough to show that there was a problem, and a problem that the government had to address. And so he wrote a report, but it didn't have to be an extensive report or investigation. I never found an opportunity to do something quite so clever, but one must keep an eye out for that in order to save resources and still have high impact. Systemic investigations may be triggered by all manner of reasons. I've already indicated that complainants, individual complainants themselves, may identify that the issue goes beyond them. Normally, when there are issues that are highly sensitive, high profile, of wide public interest and debate, that may indicate a need for a systemic investigation. Often, when these issues are debated in the public, it would mean that no particular authority is actually addressing it. And so it spins out in the public arena. I'll give you an example from Bermuda. We wrote a report called Today's Choices, Tomorrow's Cost. And this dealt with the approval by the minister of a major hotel development on land that had previously been protected environmentally, and indeed was located in the last, most pristine, most biodiverse area of the island. Now, we could not, within jurisdiction, investigate the actual decision of the minister, but what we investigated was the information provided to the minister to make that decision by the civil servants in the Department of Planning. And our investigation found that, in fact, no environmental impact assessment had been required before the minister made this decision. And this was contrary to a number of things. It was contrary and inconsistent indeed with global environmental impact standards. It was contrary to Privy Council decisions from the UK, now called the UK Supreme Court, which applied to Bermuda. And most important, it was contrary to an explicit environmental charter that Bermuda had signed with the UK that said that environmental impact assessments would be required for development proposals that were major or likely to have severe adverse effect on the environment. So on its own and on its face, that warranted a major investigation. And it's an investigation which has been relied upon also by other overseas territories of the UK in dealing with some of the public officials' treatment of their environmental charters. We actually also had a legal case that set the standard for that. Another issue in Bermuda that had been part of the public domain, which I'll mention, was eventually reported in what we call a tale of two hospitals. In that case, we had over the years, bubbling up in the media, indications that there were problems of racism amongst doctors at the hospital in Bermuda. We have only one hospital, so automatically that made this issue a matter of public debate and import. And these issues have bubbled up over the years. They were never formally addressed. And we actually got specific complaints about them. And we found that indeed, after investigating, indeed, there was differential treatment of complaints against Black doctors by the white doctors. There were other issues, bigger than just that issue of racism and discrimination. There were poor mortality and morbidity clinical incident review processes. There were inadequate policies for appointments of heads of medical practices, and all of which was a lingering reflection and legacy within the hospital of the island's history of systemic racism. So it was a big issue, and it coalesced in these specific complaints of Black doctors. And in that particular case, I just want to note that deciding whether or not to conduct an investigation, a systemic investigation, and is this a good use of our resources, an ombudsman would often make a preliminary assessment. In that particular case, we asked just a few simple questions and discovered that in Bermuda at the time, there were two medical associations. One was mostly Black doctors, the other was mostly white doctors. So on its face, I felt that there was a prima facie case to substantiate complaints and concerns that there was a racial divide amongst the medical professionals. And this was our one hospital servicing everybody on the island. And there was an increasing lack of confidence by the public, and therefore it warranted a systemic investigation. Other triggers include issues, for example, if a matter or complaint spans several ministries or departments and you have information and witnesses in various places, it is useful for an ombudsman to actually come in and pull all of that together in order to define what the story is about system problems that would not be addressed within each ministry or department. And of course, if complaints are persistent and repeated over time and demonstrate some sort of systemic pattern or trend that affect multiple people, then that tells you that there might be a need for a systemic investigation. We've already noted that if the root causes of the complaints or concerns coming to the ombudsman are about systems rather than maladministration by individual civil servants, or there are cases where civil servants will feel bound by established practices or guidelines and end up making decisions or taking actions that are inherently maladministered. They're unfair, inefficient, arbitrary, unreasonable, mistake of facts, and so forth. But the civil servants who are delivering the public service may feel that they have to follow the practices of that particular ministry or department. And those are cases where the root causes are in fact systemic. We've already touched upon the fact that if complaints are complex or multiple, severe, they go beyond an individual, and also where the facts are complex or highly technical or not agreed upon. No one agrees with what the basic facts are. Those are, again, instances where the ombudsman would want to come in and establish a common record. And from that, determine what are the appropriate recommendations. Of course, there are also issues where no other authority has the jurisdiction to investigate. And in fact, the issue will fester and go on and repeat. They might not be specifically criminal, so it's not something that the police or Department of Public Prosecutions would look at. In the case that I mentioned earlier of A Tale of Two Hospitals, racism is actually within the authority of the Human Rights Commission of Bermuda. So I, in fact, checked with them first. And I said, is this something that you can handle? Can you do a systemic investigation rather than the ombudsman? They thought about it and decided that they could not do so, that they could investigate individual complaints, but at the time did not have the jurisdiction to do a full-fledged systemic investigation. So under those circumstances, we decided that we were the appropriate authority. There are times also when, in fact, a government may request a particular review and the ombudsman may decide that the issue is such that they would exercise their authority to do so. There is another situation where we had a fear of retribution by complainants. This was the situation of the National Archives. We have one National Archives, and various researchers who needed to use the archives over and over. In fact, for many people, it was their livelihood. They were complaining that the archivist was treating it as her personal preserve. And if she liked you or if she liked your research, she would give you all sorts of information. If she didn't, she was not forthcoming. And she had undermined her staff. Now, we had heard originally for about a year before from staff complaining, but we felt that was an employment matter and not something we could really look at, not within jurisdiction. And so when 6 researchers eventually started to come to us over a period of 6 months, I wanted to test whether or not they were ganging up and trying to force an investigation. So what we did was a preliminary assessment, as I mentioned earlier. We did a quick test. We went to the archives. The researchers had said, you look in the finding aids at the front of the reception area and you can't find what you're looking for. So we did. We devised 4 tests. One test was we'd look at the finding aids and then see if that stuff could actually be found by the staff inside the repository. Or we went to the repository, we just arbitrarily selected some items, and then we tracked back to see if they were in the finding aids. Based on that quick test, we decided that yes, indeed, there was a problem meriting an investigation. So those are some of the issues. The final issue that I'll mention of when you would warrant a systemic investigation is when an issue is just not amenable to any kind of informal resolution process. And again, it's a big issue. You can't resolve it by discussions and mediation, and it really needs to be investigated. So I will end with some bullet points or some notes about the value of a systemic investigation, some of the lessons we can learn from them. And these also would be some of the reasons that an ombudsman would take into consideration. By the way, just to note that usually, almost invariably, always, a systemic investigation produces a formal report. I learned from Ontario Ombudsman that if the reports have an eye-catching cover and if they have an eye-catching title, then that tends to command the attention of the media, of the public, and most importantly, of the authorities. I remember when we were about to do our archives report, I was fretting because archives are not all that exciting a subject for most people. It's pretty arcane, the processes and procedures and so forth. And so I decided, you know, to make it slightly interesting and to demonstrate the point that the researchers had complained about, that nobody knows what's in the archives, we would have the text of the report and the investigation on the right-hand side, but on the left-hand side of the pages, and those of course are the days when we're doing things by page as opposed to screening down, we would in fact show items from the archives. We ended up with 55 interesting, different items from the archive that nobody had ever seen. We did ask some researchers, what's in the archives that you think is really interesting that no one would know of unless it came out in this kind of report? And we got 55 fascinating images. And that made the authorities, the legislators, actually read the report a little bit more closely because they were turning the next page to see what was on the left-hand side of the page. So you have to make sure that your report is interesting enough. I remember a politician once said to me, oh, you know, we liked it when you had those pictures, so make sure you have lots of photographs. And so for the environmental report that we did, Today's Choices, Tomorrow's Costs, we broke up the report into easily digestible segments. We showed what some of the threatened species were in that biodiverse area, and really gave them the whole picture. The other thing about doing this whole picture is that you pull all of the information into one place. And that is a value of the archives. We had of the investigation. We had a situation where, and I'll be ending in a couple of minutes, we had a situation where we have a grave site. This grave site comes from the 1800s, and it was a grave site that was for a particular small but highly independent Black population that was self-sufficient, self-reliant, and the gravesite was the only last remaining remnant and legacy of that community. It was in a golf course. In 1920, the government expropriated that land in order to create a huge, major private tourism development. And so these people lost their community, and it was not acknowledged for years in our history. Very similar, if you're following the US, very similar in some ways to the Tulsa, Oklahoma situation in the US. And so almost 100 years later, 93 years later, people were still complaining. Descendants were still upset. And it was on a golf course. And the the tourists who are playing golf were sending their golf balls onto this grave site. It was just not respectful. And so people were concerned. So we wanted to take a look at it. And there were many different versions of histories held by the descendants. There were some documents here, some documents there. The hotel had some, the church that was originally associated with this gravesite, they had some. And so what we were able to do was pull all of that information together. And then we did also some of our original research, including a dynamic interview with the last remaining resident. She was 7 years old at the time in 1920 of that expropriation. And we were able to pull that information together. And I decided, let's just put appendices and have it all in one place. And 7 years later, just last year, the government has created a historic land loss commission, and they are able to look at our website, the Ombudsman website, and get all of that information without having to do that investigation anew. So it's sometimes useful if you have disparate information, and as I noted earlier, the facts are not agreed upon, to pull all of that into an investigation. We've already discussed the fact that one value is identifying the root cause and thereby helping the governments by leading to recommendations that will change the systems. Of course, an investigation, systemic investigation, also ensures accountability at the level of the highest decision makers of the department or the ministry, not just the specific civil servants who had interacted with or conveyed their maladministered responses to complainants. The systemic recommendations, like all investigations, will ensure transparency of processes and criteria, and in so doing will explain the operations of the departments to the public at large, not just to the individual complainants. Systemic investigations also demonstrate good governance standards. In Bermuda, we relied a lot on not only our national standards, but international best practices, and would pull them in. So when we looked at the environmental impact assessment, we discovered that almost everybody, even Afghanistan and other countries, had requirements for environmental impact assessments and would often follow them. So why should this little place in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean not follow global standards? We protect whistleblowers, as I explained, for example, with the researchers at the archives, and we can focus on vulnerable populations. There are a number of populations who are not going to make complaints. In the UK, there was a study that first-generation immigrants were in fact highly intimidated by tribunals and would not necessarily go to make a complaint. And so when you're doing a systemic investigation, you might have one brave person, but you're able to make an impact on how that particular department will treat all people in that category. And in truth, be a voice for the voiceless. A couple of other things, and then I'll be finished. I keep promising that I'm going to finish, and I really will. One of the things—
Yes, madam. Yes, it will help. Yeah.
One of the things with a systemic investigation is that you can maintain a long-term watching brief. So you can follow up over the years, because it may take a year or more to actually implement some of the recommendations. You can identify corruption in particular that ought to meet a criminal referral. You can identify systemic discrimination that other agencies such as human rights should be dealing with. And the systemic investigation, generally speaking, in fact, demonstrates the independence of the ombudsman at the end of the day. If the ombudsman can conduct an investigation on his or her own motion or initiative, that shows independence. I suspect that one of the other speakers may talk about the ombudsman's systemic investigations during COVID, but I was particularly interested in the fact that during this past couple of years, governments have tried to take shortcuts in processes. For example, in Wales, when they were looking at criteria for homeless people, or power grabs. For example, in British Columbia, where they were dispensing with the certain requirements for statutory meetings. And I'm sure we're going to, in the EU, the failure of transparency regarding data gathering during this COVID period. And I'm sure we will hear from Malawi about the lack of transparency with respect to the use of emergency funds for the COVID, to deal with the COVID disaster. So there are many kinds of values that a systemic investigation will bring. You're not going to do them every day for any reason, but they are a very important part of the Ombudsman's toolbox. And thank you for your consideration and your listening.
Thank you so much, Advocate Brock. That was very enlightening, and you addressed several issues and lessons which we should learn as various ombudsmen. And I will just in short indicate that you indicated that one of the key issues of systemic investigations is that most of the time, or 87% of ombudsmen have that mandate to conduct own initiative investigations, and most of the time it's matters which are of public interest. And when you decide to investigate, surely you'll have to conduct preliminary investigation so that you can determine whether there is any prima facie case or matters which you'll have to investigate in the system. And you indicated that there's various triggers, such as several ministries involved or departments, or there is a systemic problem, or there's repeated complaints, or you are picking up a pattern or trend of this problem in the system. So you indicated that the root causes about systemic is about the system rather than individual complaints which are related to maladministration. And also the matter seems to be complex most of the time, multiple, and its facts which are not agreed upon. And you also indicated that, yes, indeed, there must be a formal report which must have a eye-catching title, or make it to be reader-friendly, also use a lot of pictures so that, or as well, it's easily, or use easily digestible segments so that it can be used. And you indicated that it also ensures accountability at high level or highest level, ensures transparency, and you then make sure that you explain the processes to the public at large. And sometimes some people might not be able to lodge complaints, but then systemic investigations assist then in handling that. And also it protects whistleblowers. It's a voice to the voiceless, especially those who don't have the means to complain. So, and the reports can be followed over the years, and it also identifies issues of corruption, and it demonstrates the independence of the ombudsman. So thank you so much for that well researched presentation, Advocate Brock. And thank you so much for availing your time. But then hang on, we will have questions which we'll have to address. So for everyone as well, is if you need the recording of this address by Advocate Brock, the presentation and all relevant documentations, you can visit the ioma.ukzn.ac.za website. All the information will be there. And unfortunately, we are now full. We cannot accept any more participants, but then you are encouraged to inform others, and we will put on our social media pages. People can then follow us and watch this session on Facebook. Thank you so much, Advocate Brock. Now I'll hand over to Ms. Barbara Finlay, who has been involved in ombudsman work for over 20 years and has been with the Office of the Ontario Ombudsman since 2005. As Deputy Ombudsman, she is responsible for the daily operations of the office, including the investigation and resolution of more than 26,000 complaints per year. She played a lead role in steering the office through its recent transition, expanding its mandate to include children and youth in care and French language services. Ms. Finlay is active in training members of the Ombudsman community and regularly speaks to a wide variety of stakeholders, stakeholder groups on the role of the Ombudsman in promoting good governance. Prior to joining the Ontario Ombudsman, she served as the Director General of Operations for Canada's first military ombudsman. She was one of the original team members involved in the creation of the National Defence and Canadian Forces Ombudsman in 1998. Ms. Finlay holds an undergraduate degree from the University of Ottawa in Social Sciences and Criminology. She graduated from the University of Ottawa Common Law Program in 1992 and was called to the bar in 1994. Over to you, Ms. Finlay, and thank you so much for sacrificing both you and Advocate Brock. You're saying it's 4 o'clock or around 5 o'clock in the morning, but you've made sure that you wake up and just come and address us. Over to you.
Good morning. Thank you. I'd like to thank the African Ombudsman Research Council and the International Ombudsman Institute for inviting me to speak on this very distinguished panel. And I do apologize if I appear a bit sleepy. It is a little early in the morning here in Ontario, Canada. As you've heard, I am the Deputy Ombudsman for the province of Ontario here in Canada. We are a classical model ombudsman office, and we derive our authority from legislation called the Ombudsman Act. We deal with over 20,000 complaints per year. Our mandate includes complaints about provincial government organizations, agencies, boards, tribunals, municipalities, universities, school boards, child protection matters, and access to French language services. Our ombudsman is Mr. Paul Dubé, who's been an ombudsman in office since 2016 and was recently appointed for a second 5-year term. As Arlene mentioned, in the Ontario Ombudsman's office, we do have a team that is dedicated just to systemic investigations. With over 20,000 complaints a year, it's an important part of our work. As Arlene mentioned, systemic investigation tries to get the root of the problem to solve the issue for as many people as possible. So when you have so many complaints, it's of real value to us if we can select an issue which will result in a decrease in complaints or which will resolve a problem for many people. Our dedicated team for systemic investigations is called the Special Ombudsman Response Team. We've conducted over 27 such investigations since 2005. And all of our reports on our systemic investigations, and you can see examples of Arlene mentioned of report covers and titles that can be very compelling to authorities on our website. I think the link should be available at the end of my presentation. We also do run a course, as was mentioned, called Sharpening Your Teeth, which focuses on how to conduct systemic investigations in the ombudsman world. Fortunately, the course has been on hold since the pandemic, but we're hoping to resume it soon. Or looking at options to present it virtually. Without further ado, and because we don't have the luxury of much time, I'm going to jump into the topic of investigation planning. And you should see on your screen, we've made available, thank you, Frankie, slides which outline what I'm going to talk about today. I've been asked to talk about planning and conducting systemic investigations, which is something that is very near and dear to my heart. And many people often ask why plan if you've already done a preliminary assessment, you know the issue that you're looking at. What is the necessity of a plan? And for me, it's very simple. If you fail to plan, just plan to fail. I've been conducting systemic investigations in the ombudsman world for over 20 years. And even with my experience, I would never launch a systemic investigation without completing a comprehensive plan. The investigation plan is your roadmap. It's intended to guide you through the investigation. It sets out what you are investigating, how you will execute your investigation, and how you will gather the relevant facts. It will also assist you in analyzing evidence and in keeping your investigation on track. The slide says here, a good plan keeps your investigation focused. It avoids what we like to call issue creep, where your investigation keeps expanding and you can get derailed and delayed. It sets out how you will execute your investigation, what your strategy will be, and it assists you to pinpoint sources of evidence, how you will collect the evidence and review it, including documents and witnesses that you must interview. The next slide, please. A good investigation plan helps you ensure that you plan for what resources you'll require to complete your investigation. Systemic investigations can be very resource intensive. It helps you anticipate roadblocks that might arise and to prepare you for how you will address them. And finally, it sets out the timelines and milestones to ensure that you complete your investigation in a timely manner. A good investigation plan also serves as a helpful tool to allow managers to monitor the progress of your investigation. I want to talk a little about, in Ontario, we use an investigation plan template. It's something that we've designed to assist us in conducting investigations to ensure a level of consistency and a structured methodology as the investigation is executed. And it's really important, what I always stress for people is that when you're doing an investigation plan, the goal is not in of itself just to do the plan. It's meant to be a roadmap for you to lead you through your investigation. So once you complete your plan, don't file it away and forget about it. Use it as your guide to conducting a thorough and timely systemic investigation. One approach I take is whenever a question arises during the investigation, my first step is always to pull out the investigation plan and refer back to it. Remind myself of the issues we identified in the path that we're going to follow to complete the investigation. It's important to stick to the plan as much as possible, but the plan can also be flexible and adjusted as required. So this is the investigation planning template that we have designed for the Ontario Ombudsman's Office. It's a template that we use for all of the systemic investigations in our work. It allows us to ensure that each investigation is planned consistently using the same structure. And in our office, the Ombudsman himself approves each systemic investigation after having a thorough review of the plan. And we'll certainly make this available to anyone who wishes to have reference to it after. The nice thing about this plan is that the structure and methodology can be used in many different kinds of investigations, can be adapted to fit whatever type of investigation you're doing, whatever context you work in, and can be adapted to fit many different sizes and types of ombudsman's offices as well. We also use it for individual complaint investigations as well as our broader systemic works. The methodology that you follow is really the same in any kind of investigation that you're going to do. So in the time that we have, I'm going to very quickly take you through the plan as we would use it in Ontario for doing a systemic investigation. And the first thing that we would do is we would look at the allegations and the issues to be investigated. This is where, next slide, please. This is where you define what you are investigating. It's very important that the issues be clear and concise. We often use a question format. In complicated cases, we'll break the issues down into primary or secondary issues. And the issues are important because they determine what evidence you will need to collect during the course of your investigation, and ultimately what findings and recommendations you will need to make. As Arlene mentioned, it's very important to do a preliminary assessment of the issues before you start your investigation. This helps you really refine what it is you're going to look at during the course of your investigation. And it's very important to do your homework first.
Apology, Vivian Gondo. Frankie, can you mute them, please? Frankie, can you mute Vivian Gondo?
You can enter.
Okay, let me
video, madam. They say you to everything. So I offer because of the noise they by that. They don't start already.
And Grace Oyedabo, Oyebade.
Okay.
Can you switch off, please? Yeah, thank you, thank you. Apology, Ms. Fendley. You can continue.
Thank you. Thank you. It's also when you're starting your investigation and you're identifying the issues that you're going to investigate, doing the preliminary assessment is very helpful in order to identify specifically what it is your investigation is focused on. And it's important to keep in mind that the issues that you're investigating are not necessarily the same as the allegations put forward by the complainant. As an investigator, you must decide the issues and the scope of your investigation, and you need to ensure that you're able to retain control over the process of your investigation and remain objective. So the issue should be determined based on what you can investigate in accordance with your mandate and the jurisdiction of your office. So this is here where you want to do this kind of analysis as you're setting out on your investigation. You also want to avoid overly broad or vague issues. Quite often we'll have very broad questions put to us. For example, allegations of corruption in a township or a municipality. And how would you investigate that? The issue needs to be much more concrete and specific in order for you to focus your investigation and collect evidence which will be relevant. You need to be also clear on what you're investigating and what you are not investigating during the scope of your investigation. This comes up quite often in our work in the Ombudsman of Ontario. Many years ago, we did an investigation into billing, the billing process by Ontario's hydroelectric company. There are many allegations that a new billing system had left people unable to understand their bills. Many people did not receive bills or receive bills after many months of very high amounts. And we had to be very clear that we were looking at the process for billing people for not electricity. We were not looking at the rates that the government was charging or the green energy plan that the government had introduced, as these were issues that were determined to be outside of the Ombudsman's investigation. So it's very important at the beginning of your plan to look at both what you can investigate and also what you cannot investigate. You want to avoid issue creep, where you're constantly expanding the scope of your investigation by adding new issues and questions as they arise. I like to use what I call the parking lot, where if there is an issue that comes up during investigation that we think may be relevant, come back to it once you've answered the questions that you first set out to look at. So once we've identified the issues in our investigation plan, we then move to our strategy. If you want to put the next slide up, please. This is where you will describe how you intend to organize and execute the fact gathering process. The investigator will set out the steps that they need to take in the course of the investigation, such as notice, when and how the organizations that you're investigating will be notified about your investigation. Under our legislation, the Ombudsman Act here in Ontario, we have to give formal written notice to the head of the agencies that we're investigating. You want to set out how you're going to request documents. Whether you are going to publicly announce your investigation. I think this can be very important in ombudsman work when you're looking at systemic investigations. As Arlene mentioned, systemic issues are those which have a very high public interest component. They're issues which you have determined are extremely relevant to the people that you're serving as ombudsman. So you want those people that you're serving to know what you're investigating. They're also helpful as a question of transparency, so people are aware of the work of your office. They assist you in demonstrating your value. And when you publicly announce an investigation, you can put out a call for witnesses or those who may have evidence that are relevant. So while you may have started an investigation on your own motion, by publicly announcing it, that may motivate others to come forward to you with complaints which are relevant to that. We've experienced this many times in the Ontario Ombudsman. In the investigation I mentioned of hydroelectricity rate billing, we had About 100 complaints when we started. After we announced the investigation, we received thousands of other complaints and ultimately received over 11,000 complaints during the course of that investigation. You will want to, as well as you're planning your systemic investigation, prepare for how you're going to deal with new complaints that will arrive that are relevant to the investigation. You may want to do some research and receive a briefing about the organization that you're going to investigate. You will want to research media and social media to be aware of the issue and the context in which your investigation is being conducted. And you may also want to consider whether you're going to be looking at best practices in other jurisdictions to see how they have dealt with the same issue. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. Quite often, the problem that we've identified is not unique to our province or even our country or our jurisdiction. We like to look at how other jurisdictions have dealt with the matter and what are considered to be recognized best practices. This will ultimately give weight to your own findings and recommendations when you put them forward, if you're able to point out how these recommendations that you're making have been adopted and implemented successfully elsewhere in the world. As part of your investigation plan, you also want to look at what we call special considerations. If you want to move to the next slide, please. You want to look at what can you anticipate and what can you be prepared for during the course of your investigation. It's been many different things which are set out in the template. How you deal with stakeholders and interest groups. Do you anticipate resistance or a lack of cooperation or even obstruction? What formal powers may you need to exercise? What powers do you have available in your authority, such as subpoena powers, taking evidence under oath, inspecting premises, if those are available to you? Whether you anticipate receiving evidence from whistleblowers, whether witnesses may be reluctant or fear reprisal, if there's other concurrent investigations going on, and how you will ensure that you stay in your lane and not overlap on these. And a major consideration that we're all dealing with right now is the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Both our staff and the public servants we deal with, many are working from home. Public servants are actively responding to public health emergencies on a daily basis, and you need to determine how this will affect your investigation and how you will be able to adapt for this. Next, you want to look at what are the sources of evidence. Next slide, please. This is where you set out the evidence that you need to collect and how you will go about collecting it. Want to look at what laws, regulations, policies, or procedures are applicable to the issues that you've identified. Right now, now in the times we work in, evidence often comes in digital format. When I started doing this work, evidence came in boxes and paper files where you'd tend at offices to search through files. And now evidence tends to arrive on USB keys or terabytes of data. You need to be prepared and ensure you have the proper technical support to receive and review electronic documents that may be kept and stored in different formats, depending on the organization that you're dealing with. Recently had to go out and research programs for searching a specific format of emails. We received over 100,000 emails from a government organization which were in a specific format. Our investigators are now going through those. So we had to research different technical programs to allow us to do this, which was planned for in our investigation plan. Some of you may be using data management tools to review digital evidence during your investigations. We've got a number of programs that have emerged here in Canada, mostly in the legal field, to assist in going through large volumes of evidence. And we are testing which ones are useful to us in the ombudsman world. Documents are also important. You need to itemize relevant documentation, documents that you are aware of or documents that you think exist. As you get to know the environment you're working in and the organization, its processes, you have a better idea of what documents you will expect to find. You want to look at what witnesses you will want to interview. What information are you looking to gain from each witness, and in what order will your interviews be conducted? How will they be conducted, and how will you summarize the evidence? We had to pivot very quickly, I think all of us in the ombudsman world when the pandemic hit. We could no longer do interviews in person. It was great for me as an administrator because we saved on travel costs, but we had to retrain ourselves how to conduct interviews in the virtual world using Zoom and Skype and Teams and in other platforms, a very, very different environment. So this is something that got integrated into our investigation planning. Don't forget about physical evidence as well, videos, photographs, whatever might be relevant to the issue that you're investigating. You need to be prepared as how will you receive this, preserve it, and store it. Right. Moving along on the template, you also need to prepare for what resources you will require to complete your investigation. Next slide, please. Yes, sorry, if you could just go back to the previous one. You need to look at how many investigators do you have? What other staff do you have available to assist during your investigations? Just legal support, administrative support. Is your investigation likely to raise issues which may require an expert opinion? We've had cases where we've required technical experts to assist us in getting information off of servers of organizations or looking at digital files and interpreting those. Long time ago, we did, many years, we did an investigation into the lottery system in Ontario, which is a system which is run by the government, and funds from the lotteries are used to fund certain community organizations. And there were allegations that there was corruption within the lottery system, and that those who sold the tickets were winning at statistically unreasonable rates because they were stealing tickets, and there were improper controls to prevent insiders from winning. And we actually retained a statistical expert to look at the probability and the rate of by which those with who sold lottery tickets were actually claiming wins in the system. You also need to plan for what technology support you will require, what other resources you may need, and need to think about anything else which may be relevant to your investigation in advance, such as communications, if you're going to publicly announce your investigation, or if you're planning to publicly release the results of your investigation. Systemic investigations often will require a formal report with recommendations. So you want to plan with how you're going to prepare your report. What is it going to look like, and how will you release it? How will you get it out there? In the ombudsman world, our power comes from moral suasion. We have no executive authority to implement, require organizations to accept and implement our recommendations. Really, our power comes from being able to put our recommendations out there publicly. You want to plan for that as you're planning your investigation, so you're ready when your report and recommendations are prepared. Next slide, please. As ombudsman, we take complaints about delay in other organizations. So you want to plan the timing of your investigation. You want to be as timely and sufficient as possible. But at the same time, timeliness should not result in compromising thoroughness. Sometimes you need to take the necessary time to make sure that you have all of the evidence and to do a thorough review. Systemic issues can be very complex, very complicated, raise very difficult policy questions. So you need to make sure that you plan the time to get the necessary evidence to have a thorough review. We've also learned during the current pandemic that we need to be flexible. The reality is many of the government organizations that we're dealing with need more time to respond to our requests than otherwise normally would, because they are dealing with the pandemic in real time, many times with staff who are working remotely and don't have access to the normal things they would have in normal times. You also need to be flexible yourself in terms of your resources and how you're going to allocate them and what your time you're going to allocate. It's important to have a fixed schedule with targets and timelines so you can avoid undue delays. We work in very busy environments, and a good plan with proper milestones and timelines will make sure that you stay on track. Always have target dates for each stage of your investigation. You can adjust them as needed, but if you don't have targets, I think you will feel like you'll never finish. Finally, just a note about flexibility. You have to acknowledge that unfortunately investigations, just as in life, you cannot plan for everything. There will inevitably be something that comes up which you didn't plan for and which you may need to adapt in your plan. The structure of the template that we've designed, however, should assist you in doing this in a way which allows you to still maintain your focus, stay on track, and complete your investigation in a thorough fashion. So we have at the end of the presentation is see how you can find us at the Ontario Ombudsman's office. There's lots of resources available on our website, examples of systemic investigations that we've conducted. All of our systemic reports are up there, and you can certainly get a good sample of the kinds of systemic work that we've done. Certainly feel free to reach out to us if you have specific questions about systemic investigations, and hopefully we'll have some updates on our website soon about our Sharpening Your Teeth training course. So that's my presentation, and I'm certainly available to take any of your questions.
Thank you so much, Deputy Ombudsman. We thank you so much for the presentation, very enlightening. And I'm busy also multitasking here, just making sure that I also note what people are saying on the charts and taking questions, which I will ask later. But then to summarize what you've done, and thank you so much for the presentation, which will make our work very easy, because then one will have to visit the website and our social media pages to follow up on what you have presented. So in summary, your presentation was focusing on how we need to plan for the systemic investigation. So we need to have a planning template, how you will make sure that you organize, you execute fact-finding mission or the fact-gathering, in fact, the overall plan. But what I also like the most is that you have a team within your office which specializes or which deals with systemic investigations. And you also indicated that the plan which you would have drafted before initiating the investigation will cover a number of issues, which I think most of the ombudsmen, every investigation which we conduct, definitely we have an investigation plan, which is like your project plan. And in this matter as well, that systemic investigation should have that, and that should be approved by the ombudsman, that particular plan. And there are special considerations which we needed to take into consideration and what to anticipate, and we need to be prepared. And in the planning as well, what sources of evidence we need to have, like your laws, prescripts, evidence which is stored digitally, and physical evidence. Possibly it includes also the inspection in local where possible, and the various stakeholders and groups which one would want to meet. And you even indicated that that template will also then indicate what personnel you need, the resources you need, because some of it will include traveling, fact-finding mission, what other information you need, the kind of system you need, the data you need to collate and how you analyze that. And finally, as well, your plan should have a start date, the milestone, the timeframes, and the completion date, like any other project plan. And thank you so much for also sharing the various sites we need to visit, because this will be very much helpful to all of us, where we can visit the Facebook, Twitter page, YouTube page, and as well the website of your organization, where we can get and follow up on all the systemic investigations which you have conducted. Thank you so much for availing yourself and affording us this opportunity to engage with you, and you address us as an expert in the field. And I think not going to questions, but I've seen somebody saying, where can I get a training in South Africa? I think because now training or e-learning and such training presentations, and as you are promising that you will have the virtual training on sharpening your teeth and other virtual training. So we are looking forward to that, and that will be beneficial. What I would also want to add is that systemic investigations which are investigated, as for instance, in South Africa, we also normally say how we've structured our web page is that you'd want even students, law students, and everyone who'd want to know more about our reports, because we want them to use our report as touchstones to learn from our reports, not only students, public servants, or any other stakeholder, because we've clustered them accordingly: maladministration, conduct failure, corruption, Executive Members Ethics Act investigations. So we would expect anyone who would want to know, or anyone who's occupying a position which will require them to be conscious of good governance principles, to visit that particular page. So our next speaker will be the Ombudsman. Thank you so much, Ms. Finley. Just stay around so that we can, you can assist in answering the questions. So the next Ombudsman, the next speaker is Honorable Mathachi Zuma, who was appointed the Ombudsman of the Republic of Malawi on the 1st of December 2015, and her holding of the position of the Ombudsman constitutionally makes her a Commissioner of the Malawi Human Rights Commission, a Commissioner of the Malawi Police Service Commission, and an Inspector of Prisons. So Ombudsman's mandates differ from country to country. So she holds a Master's of Laws with credit in International Law and World Economy from the University of East London, and Bachelor of Laws degree from the University of Malawi. She served as a legal counsel for Limbe Leaf Tobacco Company Limited from 2011 to 2015. Before joining the private sector, she worked with Malawi government as a judicial officer for about 9 years. Between 2002 to 2011, she held various judicial positions, including Senior Resident Magistrate Assistant, Registrar of the High Court and Supreme Court of Appeal, and the Deputy Chairperson of the Industrial Relations Court. She currently serves on the board of the International Ombudsman Institute as a director of the African region. She's also a Treasurer General. She was a Treasurer General of the Ombudsman and Mediators Association and a board member of the Electoral Institute of Southern Africa. But since she has now no longer the Ombudsman, and we thought it much that she will share her experience and use this platform as a farewell to fellow ombudsman in the continent, and internationally. Over to you, Honorable Chizuma. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, PP. Thank you for that generous introduction. Sorry, I will not use my video because where I am, the network is pretty bad. So I don't want to mess up the band with it. So I hope that's fine. Or
we will
want
to have your picture at least so that Frankie and them can take your picture and then you can switch off your mic. I understand the issue of the network as one of the speakers and for everyone to see you. Thank you so much, Honorable Chizuma. Let me just take a picture so that I can also assist, you know, to multitask. Okay, that's it. Okay, you switch off. Thank you so much.
Right. Thank you. All right. So thank you very much. What I will do, because I think I listened a bit to the presentation by Aline and just the Ombudsman from Canada. So what I'll do, my presentation on this will simply focus on Malawi's experience, which is already what PP said in her introductory remarks, the experience that we've had in as far as systemic investigations are concerned. And I'm glad that the first speaker was Aline, because in as far as the Office of the Ombudsman Malawi is concerned, she is the queen of systemic investigations. She's the one who helped us in as far as getting to know what systemic investigations are all about and really how to go about it. And she was the one who was at the center of our first ever systemic investigation that we conducted in 2016, giving us guidance and just some tips on how to go about it. So until 2016, the Malawi Office of the Ombudsman dwelled much, was focusing on handling one-off complaints. And as you all know, with that kind of approach, the directives or recommendations that we make are only targeted at that particular complaint that office was dealing with. And in 2015, early 2015, going to 2016, we started implementing what we called the Repositioning Agenda, with the sole purpose of trying to make the office more relevant to the that Malawi was going through. So in as far as complaint handling is concerned, we realized that it is impossible to uproot repeated acts of maladministration if public service weaknesses are not comprehensively addressed. And that's where now we adopted the systemic investigation. So for us, how we understand the investigation is that it's an investigation that involves a deeper look and examination of emerging trends, patterns, or practices arising from misapplication and lack of or defective legislation, policies, and or programs. And for the Office of the Ombudsman, determining whether or not to conduct a systemic investigation is largely determined by the scope of injustice itself, because by our constitution, our mandate is to investigate any injustice. So when we are looking at a complaint and trying to determine whether we need to go the systemic investigation route, we look at the scope of the injustice itself. So generally for us, the injustice in question, if it affects or targets a particular class or group of people in a particular part of the country, that for us is one indicator that this may require a systemic investigation. Also, if the injustice complained about is institutionalized or it keeps on recurring over and over again, and where the method of violation is always the same, that again is a matter that we believe can go systemic investigation route. And also, I think I also heard Aline or the previous speaker, where the matter is really high profile issue, covering a wide range of issues. Again, we take the systemic investigation route with that one. So for us, the investigation involves an intrinsic analysis and scrutiny of the laws applicable, the processes, practices, policies, and regulations of an institution being investigated, which its misapplication result in occasioning an injustice to the public that is supposed to be faced by that particular institution. In as far as the methodology, because that's one aspect that Frankie asked me to touch on, I will just go through the methodology that we have been using as an office. The first step is legal screening, what we call the legal screening. And this is not only specific to systemic investigations, but any other complaint goes through the normal legal screening. And after we have established that this probably is a systemic investigation matter, we identify the core investigation team. So this team is composed of lawyers, composed of investigators within the office, and composed of researchers. So for each and every systemic investigation, there's always a specific team that is set up to look into the investigation. And so the team is responsible for assessment and the definition of the scope of the investigation, as well as coming up with the investigation plan, which Aline and the previous speaker has also alluded to. We also identify the key investigation players, meaning we kind of scope out or map out the relevant parties, the respondents that we need to engage with during the investigation. And then after we have done all that, we have an investigation plan with the estimated time period set up. We then send the notification of the investigation to the relevant stakeholders. I heard the ombudsman from Canada mentioning about that, that sometimes you publicize, sometimes you don't. Even for us, we have to determine whether we want to publicize the investigation or not. Most of the times we have had to publicize because usually the systemic investigation will be touching on issues that are mostly hot topics in the country. So there's a lot of public interest in the matter, but also as the Ombudsman from Canada has said, it helps in obtaining even further information as regards the specific issue that you are investigating. As per practice, before we send the notification, what we've been doing is that the Ombudsman, who has been myself for the past 5 years, would have an informal chat, either through the phone or in person, with the main responding institution that will be investigating. So what would usually happen is that I'll take a phone and call the head of the institution, this would be the principal secretary, to inform him of the complaint and what my office will be doing. So usually this takes like an informal chat in the office or through the phone, and simply brief him on what we are expecting from him. So this kind of, it helps us to have this understanding that we are not just being antagonistic, but that it also kind of helps to get more cooperation and coordination, rather cooperation from the responding institution. And usually what has happened is that every time I've had that interface with a particular head of the institution, they would already identify a key person from that institution who will be responding to our queries. So after we've sent the notification, the formal notification, usually it involves the issue that we are investigating and the initial list of documentation that we probably are seeking from them. After we've done that, we do the data collection. So the investigation plan, as I've mentioned, it directs the mode of data collection, whether we're going to do public inquiries where we invite people to give us evidence under oath, or simple interviews, or visiting some scenes for observation of processes, meetings, and requests for documentation for analysis. So it should also be noted that during this time, during the time that we are doing all this, we also monitor developments, any further developments that may be there through mainstream media or even social media over the issue. After that step, after we've done all that,
Ombudsman, can you hold a bit? Please Can you mute? Can you mute whoever's mic is on? Please, we are using a public platform, so we are pleading with you to mute your Okoye Prince Will. Please mute. Hanuta James, please mute your mic. And Frankie, can you help to just mute their mic?
I've muted them. I've
Okay.
muted them.
You can proceed, madam.
Okay, thank you. So as I said, the data collection during this time, either through public inquiries, interviews, collection of documents and analysis of the same, we also closely monitor any further developments over the issue through social media or the mainstream media. After we've done all that, we start shaping up our report and really developing the first draft. After this stage, we go through what we call fact-checking and the data confirmation. So what usually happens at this stage is we invite back all the parties that we have spoken to, especially the major players in the investigation, to come to our office and simply go through the information that we collected from them, if it is actually the correct information. Whether there are clarifications that they may want to make, this is the stage that this happens. After this, we discuss, okay, so before we even go there, at this stage where we are doing fact-checking and the data confirmation, our law, the Ombudsman Act, gives power to the Ombudsman to determine the extent of any of the investigation. So where we feel that maybe there's something that may not be like very much connected to the issue, but we believe that through this investigation, we can also address another issue that may not have been the main issue during the investigation. We also do that. We've done that in a number of investigations, systemic investigation that we've done, that we could be investigating something to do with the illegal or irregular recruitments of a particular institution, but to an extent that that particular institution is somehow related to another institution. We found ourselves also going to that other institution using that provision. So after the fact-checking and data confirmation, we've come up with a draft report with our what we believe are the remedies or recommendations, directives or recommendations that we need to make. We go through a discussion of possible remedial measures with the relevant stakeholders. This to us has proved to be an effective tool in as far as compliance of the directives and recommendations is concerned. So this may not necessarily require the respondents to come to the office, but maybe through just phone calls, we do that. Not all investigation reports we've gone through this process, but in those that we believe that we need an input from them, we have done that. And as I said, it has proved to be a very effective tool in as far as compliance of those directives and the recommendations are concerned, especially for investigations to do with in the health system and also in the labor justice system. We have done that. So we discuss with them if what we are suggesting is doable, and also the time limit, the period within which they believe they can do that. So it's not like we simply take what they're saying, what they're telling us, but also we look at the reasonableness of the same, and then come up with what we believe would be the most sensible directive on a particular issue. So after we've done that, then we improve our report based on the discussions that we've had. And then, since, as I said, there's always a team that overlooks, that actually does the investigation. The ombudsman, I as ombudsman, I simply provide oversight. So now there comes a stage when the ombudsman and that particular team sits down now to look at the whole report, an internal discussion of the report, where now we go through almost line by line to look at how the report is shaping up and the stuff. After we are at a very comfortable stage, comfortable place with the report, our objective as an office of the ombudsman is to make sure that our reports, that people of Malawi, the ordinary Malawian, can relate with the report. And to that extent, what we do is to make our reports put our reports in as simple English as possible. We avoid, to the best of our ability, putting too much legalese in the report, especially where we can avoid it. So what we do is we usually identify quite a sensible, reasonable, and a reasonable junior officer within the office. So this could be like a clerk within the office, maybe even someone in the administration. What we do is we identify that person and give him the printed draft of the report. He can have it the whole day, and then he reads it. And then we ask him to explain the report back to us if he understands it. Once he understands, once we determine that he understands the substance of the report, then we proceed now to finalize the report. Because as I said, at the end of the day, we take him as an average Malawian walking down the street and see if we give that Malawian that copy of the report, if she will be able to understand it. So once it passes that test, then we feel comfortable enough to now finalize the report, clean it up, and come up with the final draft. And after we do that, we then decide on the date for its public release. Usually all our reports have gone through public release, except maybe for the early 1 or 2 reports, but the rest have gone through public release, because what has happened with us is that almost all the systemic investigations that we have done, they have attracted public attention. And once we do that, once we have set down the date for the release, what we do is we send the hard copy of the report to the responding institutions at least a day or 2 days before the actual date of the release, just to keep them informed of the contents of the report before the public gets to know, so that once, if the public goes to them for comments or responses, they should be able to provide those responses. So then we send when we are sending the report to them, we are also telling them that we will release this report publicly on such a day, and we are expecting you to come to our office for the public release. So usually, the moment we do that, we put a notification, usually on our social media platforms, which automatically informs the public and automatically informs the media houses. So what has happened is that almost all our reports, we've had all the major media houses at our office, and they beam the release of the report live. So usually what I would do during the beaming, during the public release, is simply to present to the public the executive summary of the report. And what we have also discovered is that these public releases have become a tool for public education in as far as issues of administrative justice is concerned in Malawi, because we've had so much feedback. You meet someone at the market, they would start talking about your report and the issues that came out of there and how they actually affecting them as Malawians. So this is the steps that as the Office of the Ombudsman we have taken. And during that report, since we had already sent the respondents the report maybe a day or 2 before, what usually happens is that, and this is kind of a logical way that we adopted in the office to kind of also gain compliance, we kind of put them on the spot. So once I've done the report, what we do is that we also ask for their immediate reaction. And usually what happens is that, no, we have the Ombudsman already sent this to us, and we undertake to comply. So they do that on national TV, and that already puts them in check that the public is watching and that they need to actually follow through their undertaking in as far as compliance of the directives in the report are concerned. So since our first report, we released, we have done, I think, from 2016 to 2021, if I'm not mistaken, the office has done about 8 systemic investigations. It's been really some hectic period within the office. The first one had to do with the one that I was mentioning that Aline Brock really helped us through. something to do with a loan that Malawi government took from government of India for purchase of farm inputs, no, like farm machinery, which when the farm machinery came, the government decided to sell the farm machinery to some top politicians and top public officers in the country. So it was just one poor farmer who simply wrote us a 3-line complaint. The government took this loan. I heard that the farm machinery came, but I also heard that the farm machinery went to senior public officers. I cannot access the farm machinery. Help me. It was as simple as that. And already that complaint required systemic investigation, because the victims are really all the farmers, the smallholder farmers in the country who were supposed to benefit from that loan. And also it involved almost 4 major government institutions. That's a parliament that approved the loan, the treasury, the Minister of Agriculture, and then the Minister of Finance. So it automatically qualified to be a systemic investigation. After that, we also released in October 2017, Malawi's, the title of the report was Malawi's Unhealed Wounds, which was an investigation into the operations of what is equivalent of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of South Africa. In Malawi, called National Compensation Tribunal. So it was about the manner in which the tribunal was operated and set up, operated, and dissolved in Malawi, which left about 24,000 victims non-compensated after it was dissolved. The third one was out of sight and out of mind. This one was triggered by an investigation newspaper article on the issues of delivery of the injustices that the mental people with mental disabilities were facing in as far as accessing mental health in major hospitals in the country. So we simply saw a newspaper article and we said, you know, these are people who cannot complain on their own. So we initiated an own initiative and used a systemic investigation approach to do that. And then the next one was painful processes. This was an investigation into allegations of maladministration in the compensation processes of injured workers by Malawi's Workers' Compensation Commission. And this was triggered. This was an investigation that was triggered by a number of complaints that were in the office, all our region, all our offices across Malawi, and the issues were the same. Delays in providing the compensation and unjustified reduction of the extent of the injury. So those were the 2 main issues that would arise in all the complaints that we had, and we decided to do a systemic investigation. And then another one was abandoned on the streets. That was a report that we released on 22nd of March 2019. And this was triggered by a complaint that was lodged by one of the CSOs in the country about neglect and act of bias in the discharge of the duties by the state and district councils over the manner in which they are handling children working and living in the streets. Another investigation that really attracted also a lot of attention was the Wars of the Womb. This was a report that we released on 22nd of August 2019. It was an investigation of alleged malpractices resulting in the removal of uteruses from expectant women in public health facilities. Again, this one, there was no complaint. We looked at the vulnerability of the people in question. It came from the newspaper article, both radio, news article from both radio and newspapers, which kind of warned the country of the alarming rate at which uteruses were being removed from women at major public health facilities in the country. So we did that report on 22nd August 2019. Again, we then released the report in November 2020 on the misplaced priorities. Aline, I think, made mention of that. This was an investigation that we did into lack of transparency, accountability, and the responsiveness of the Malawi's COVID-19 preparation and response plan. We released it on 20th November 2020. Again, this was an on-motion investigation that the office instituted after noticing the public outcry on the lack of accountability, more especially in the use of the COVID-19 funds that Malawi government had made available to a number of institutions, but also the monies that were coming from outside Malawi. So there was quite a public uproar, and there was a need for an institution like us to kind of follow up that money. What has happened with this report is that from our findings, it led to a lot of public interest in demanding accountability for each and every penny that has been used, that was used in the COVID fight, and this forced the president to institute a forensic audit of the first bunch of money that was released, no, not first bunch, but the second bunch of money that was released, and the audit report simply confirmed everything that as an office we also found, and a lot of arrests have now happened, and more arrests are probably gonna come based on the work that we as an office did. There was also a report that we released, I think this is April 2020, Sacrifice at the Political Altar, which was an investigation into allegations concerning irregular mass promotions conducted by Ministry of Education, mass promotions of teachers by Ministry of Education, which left out a very important aspect of any recruitment or promotion in government, which is interviews. So we also released that report in 2020 April. So yeah, basically that's what I wanted to share with you in as far as our experience with the systemic investigations are concerned. I'm happy to report here that for all the reports that we have released, I think on average, I can safely say that we had at least 65 to 70% compliance rate. And this has been due to a number of factors, but largely because the very first systemic investigation report that we released in 2016 went through a number of litigation up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court simply endorsed the work that we did. So that, I think, has put most public institutions here in Malawi on guard, and that they are always, whether they are eager or they are doing it out of fear, but at the end of the day, we get our compliance and we are happy. So I think at the end of the day, it doesn't matter, but I'm happy to report that most of them have received quite some good compliance from the responding institutions. Yeah, all the reports that I've mentioned here are on our website, www.ombudsmanmalawi.org, and you can always get them there. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Ombudsman Martha Chizuma. And we are losing a rare, experience within the Ombudsman family. But we know that where you are going, you are also going to make sure that you benefit the people of Malawi, which will also contribute to the Africa which we want. So you gave us your experiences, Malawi, which is very critical as well, because we are learning from it, the methodology which you follow, everything which is mentioned by the two other speakers, you dealt with it. And it's interesting that your team of the investigation team constitutes of researchers, which I think will make the work of the investigators very easy, because then they will focus on investigations and the researchers will then collate the evidence for them, which I think is one thing we are learning from. And also the issue of calling upon all the respondents after you've collated, you've drafted your report. In South Africa, we call it a preliminary report, which is a Section 79 notice, where we give the parties an opportunity. But what I like is that you don't only write to them, you call on them and you sit around the table, you agree, and they know about that, and that will help in not having an antagonistic relations, and it will help in the implementation of your recommendations. So I think that's one issue which is very interesting. also that you publish that in various platforms, but then as well, whilst investigating, you monitor. That's what I always say to investigators. You can't be passive investigators. You can't just rely on writing to the departments or respondents and just sit. But you'll also have to check what's happening in the social media space, in mainstream media. What are the developments? So you need to be an active investigator, which I like, and you are repeating it. And then as well, the issue that 70% of your reports have been implemented, and as well that your report was also endorsed by the Supreme Court of Appeal, which I think is very encouraging, because sometimes you find that in South Africa also we had several investigation reports which also gathered a lot of interest, especially one which we did relating to illegal conversion of goods carrying Toyota Quantum panel vans to carry passengers as a mode of transport, and it caused a lot of problems and serious injuries for the public when they are involved in accidents. So that report is implemented, but as well is discussed at the portfolio committee in Parliament, and also they are monitoring its implementation. So I think reports like this have very serious impact. So without wasting any time, let me then go to the questions for the panelists so that you can, at least each one of you, we've got 5 minutes left for our process to finish. And the first question, which I will ask Aline to just address, which you've done actually in your address, and even the Deputy Ombudsman of Canada. How do you identify systemic issues for investigations? Is there a standard way of doing this? In the absence of prosecutorial powers, what strategies should be adapted to ensure implementation? So I'll just read these and then you'll note them, and you can divide. In fact, actually, I think that's the best. It will divide them amongst yourself. To ensure effectiveness, should an investigation department be a standalone department or merged with other departments, e.g. legal complaints? Why have an ombudsman institution in Africa lost the zeal and aggressiveness in the fight against maladministration in the public sector? So I think you can answer that. What should be done to revive the ombudsman institutions in Africa? And then there's a French question. I'll try to read. Bonjour à tous les quatre langues de traduction. I think this one is okay. It speaks about translations. And the next one is from Angola. Ombudsman of Angola issues more requests of explanations due to the fact that whenever recommendations are issued to governmental institutions ahead of public companies, they often don't follow the recommendations and often question the ombudsman's persuasive power. So I think that relates to implementation of remedial actions. Those are the questions, and then we've got a question from the Ombudsman of Botswana, whose question also is, let me just scroll through. Okay, before Botswana, there's one who says, do you have your own witness protection program at the Ombudsman of Ontario? How do you handle your whistleblowers? Another one, would it be possible to have a central repository of ombudsman's cases treated being treated in the cloud or iCloud? The ombudsman, okay, Deputy Ombudsman Ontario indicated that they release their reports publicly because they have no power to publish public agencies to implement their recommendations. Has that helped to ensure their implementations? I hope you get that. With own motion, this is an ombudsman from Botswana, with own motion investigations or own initiative, can we make inquiries with the source of the allegations like the media, in order to obtain more information about the allegations made without running the risk of the media reporting about the investigation prematurely. I think here where you wouldn't want to publicize. And then the other question, do we respond to entities under investigation when they defend themselves after the release of our report, especially where their defense is persuasive to the public, e.g., or for example, should the Ombudsman publicly correct the inaccurate statements which are made? And the next one, Malawian experience, can the respondent suppress some information that can implicate them in the process of investigation if they are given notice ahead of the visit of the Ombudsman? So I will just give each one of you, I'll start with Advocate Brock. 2 minutes, Advocate Brock, and then 2 minutes, Ms. Fenley, and 2 minutes, Ms. Chizuma. Can we go, please?
Yes, thank you. With respect to the media, I avoided trying to source any information from the media, and if the evidence is there, we can find it elsewhere. Let me also note that quite often individuals within departments themselves are concerned about what's going on, and they will often give you very good information, and we always protected whistleblowers simply by never naming them or exposing them, and ensuring that information that we get from a whistleblower can also be substantiated by other information. And finally, with respect to implementation, sometimes it is necessary to do follow-up reports, but keeping that long-term watching brief is very helpful. In the case of the environmental matter, it was interesting that the companies then tried to put new planning applications in under different new corporate names, but we were able to catch that and get back and publicize it so that people could see that they were trying to get around the recommendations. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Advocate, for you were on time and the information is very valuable. Ms. Fenley?
Thank you. I'll pick a few different aspects of the questions that Arlene did so we can try and touch on them all. In terms of the selection of systemic issues, I think it's really important to know your environment. You need to know what's going on in the areas that you oversee. You need to regularly look at the trends of complaints that are coming into your office. You need to follow the media, even though they're not necessarily, I agree, wouldn't necessarily go to the media for evidence, but certainly they'll give you an idea of what issues are relevant, what is important. We follow debates in our parliament, we follow social media, but really I think knowing the issues that are relevant in the area that you work is really important. In terms of the implementation, the follow-up on recommendations, I love the Ombudsman of Malawi's description of the process where they actually meet with those that are responsible as they are drafting their recommendations to discuss what is reasonable and what can be done in the environment. Is really important to have buy-in as you're making your recommendations. The other thing that we've done in the province of Ontario is each report of the Ombudsman has a recommendation that the institution report back regularly on the implementation of the recommendations. It's too easy just to say we accept all the recommendations and then push them aside and go on to the next issue. We're still getting report backs from organizations on systemic issues we've investigated years ago because some of these things take a lot of time to implement. You want to be able to report each year in your annual report on the progress that's been made in implementing them, so they don't die off, they don't fall off the radar, and they're still treated as priorities. And by asking the institution to report back to you and constantly looking at the progress that's been made, if you need be, if you continue to see complaints are coming in, if recommendations have not been implemented, you can always start another investigation. That's the last resort, but it's always an option that's available to you as well. So I'll stop there also.
Thank you so much, Ms. Finley. Yes, sometimes have a special report, maybe to clarify your recommendations where they are not being implemented. I think that will help. Thank you so much for that. Ms. Chizuma.
Thank you so much. So I'll just tackle the issue whether if we give prior notification, the respondents may kind of tamper with the evidence or whatever. Maybe let me say that, as I said, before we actually go into an investigation, the issue goes, the complaint goes through some legal screening. And at that legal screening, we are also looking at the merit of the issue. And when we are determining the merit, we look at least some evidence that has been provided or that we have managed to gather on our own. So usually when we get that kind of complaint where maybe the complainant is not in a position to bring evidence, that's where the researchers come in. Like, can you go on their website? Or sometimes what we do is at the very same time that we are sending them the notification, or even before, we would have already asked probably a central government repository institution which keeps maybe some information regarding the institution that we are doing to give us the law, to give us any documents relating to the issue. The law allows us to do that. So every time that we are notifying, we already have got something to hang on to. And most of the times when they're just giving us information, it's simply to add to that. But most of the times it's really the usual, the same things that we already have. But I'm glad that maybe that could happen, but I think for us, we've never really experienced that kind of situation. And as I said, we keep on monitoring the media on the issue, and you find that there are some things that come up in the media that also help us to direct us to what kind of information we should be looking at, we should be looking for from a particular institution. On the issue of whether where the responding institution defend themselves in the media or attacking our report in the media as a result of the public release, whether the ombudsman should also respond in the media, no. I think for us, we don't do that, because what the law provides for us, of course, we get attacked on the social media, they call us all sorts of names, but so long as they don't go to court, it means that our report stands and it's binding on them to comply. So basically what we do is we simply wait for them to go to court for a review. If they go to court, that's where now we respond to whatever issues that they may bring up. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Chizuma. Thank you, Advocate Brock. Thank you, Ms. Finlay. My job is done, and we've learned a lot from all of you. And I think we can improve as much as possible. And I would also want to add what Ms. Chizuma said. If they haven't gone to court, because some countries, their remedial actions are not binding. I know Malawi also, the court said your remedial actions are binding, like in South Africa. I think the issue of continuous persuasion and the issue of continuously and as well work as closely as possible with the various departments to avoid that antagonistic relations. And I think Advocate Brock also mentioned the level, or at what level do you pitch the engagement? Because if you work closely with the minister, the DG, and they will understand that you are there as an ombudsman to help them, actually, not to have or to fight with them, but to help them to deliver services to the public. So most of the questions, if you've got more questions, you've got more information which you need to get, please visit the website which I've mentioned earlier, which is the website of AORC, in fact, AOMA, which is based at the UKZN, and you will get all the presentations, all the documents, which is http, in fact, it's AOMA.ukzn.ac.za. You will get all the presentations, the recordings are there, the answers to the questions, and whatever question you ask, you can continue doing that. We will put it on the website for everyone to benefit. So my role has ended, and over to you, Frankie, for the closure of the session.
Thank you, Pipi. Thank you very much to everyone. I think that's it. You've closed the session, Pipi, and thank you very much for facilitating this. It was brilliant. It was magnifique. We really appreciate Advocate Book. Thank you again. Thank you. We will call you again. Miss Finlay, please don't get tired of us. This is the only medium of the best medium, by the way, because of COVID-19, so we might need you. I'm just receiving SMSs. Actually, we've registered 564 people, but we could only accommodate 300. So maybe we might call you to do this again for those who were not able to attend. But we'll make also the presentation available. If you didn't send any to us, please send us your presentation because they will need it and the video will be available. This is the end. Thank you very much. Much appreciated. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Frankie. Bye.